The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
On Monday morning, I did not expect to be sitting here on Thursday morning saying the Commanders are the only team in the NFL without a head coach. I mean, how did this happen? A couple of weeks ago, this was the best job in the NFL that was open, and they aren't getting any takers. This really embarrassing nugget from yesterday as Mike Macdonald, the defensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens, took the Seattle job, and Adam Schefter reported that the Commanders reached out to him while he was traveling to Seattle to see if he wanted to change his mind. There's an air of desperation here that I did not expect. You know, this is strange. Ben Johnson, who was the reported top choice going back to like maybe even the middle of the season, he's decided to stay in Detroit. Tom Lovero's got some thoughts on that in his column today. I'll go through that. That was surprising. And then they had focused on Macdonald, and it seemed like made a lot of sense. Macdonald spent his whole career in Baltimore. His wife's from the area, former Redskin cheerleader. Nope, he's gone across the country. And I guess we can speculate on a lot of reasons for it, but it is what it is. And, you know, Dan Snyder's not here anymore. He's long gone. And now they're looking at 4 candidates, according to reports, and 3 of them are defensive guys, and the offensive guy at one time may have looked enticing, but Eric Bieniemy, who's still on staff, he's still under contract for another year as the offensive coordinator. He's been interviewed for the head coaching job. The other 3 are defensive guys, and maybe Dan Quinn is the front runner. He's interviewed for the job. He was here the other day, and there was even a still photo of him at Reagan Airport flying home after the interview. So maybe he's the front runner for that. Aaron Glenn, who's the defensive coordinator of Detroit, as Josh Harris and his group were flying out to Detroit the other day, and Ben Johnson told him he wasn't interested. At least it wasn't a wasted trip because they got to talk to Glenn, so he's apparently still in the running. And Anthony Weaver, who would be the person I guess I would know the least about. Not that I'm totally familiar with what Aaron Glenn has done, although I know he played in the league for a long time. But in terms of Anthony Weaver, this is what the Washington Times has on that. He says, Weaver is the Baltimore Ravens defensive line coach and assistant head coach. He has experience on both sides of the football, and the Ravens defense was one of the league's most successful units this year, although he wasn't the coordinator. Weaver is the youngest of the group. The others are in their early 50s, the others being those who are still in the running, and Weaver is 43. So now what? Adam Schefter with Hannah Storm yesterday on ESPN.
Well, Hannah, the Washington Commanders have cast a wide net, and obviously they were supposed to talk to Ben Johnson. He canceled on them while they were en route to Detroit yesterday. They didn't get the chance to speak with him. Obviously, Bobby Slowick decided to remain in Houston on a contract extension. Today, Mike Macdonald, who also is a candidate for the Washington job, opted for the Seattle head coaching job. And so that leaves you right now with 3 known candidates in Washington. Dan Quinn, the Cowboys defensive coordinator, Anthony Weaver, the Baltimore Ravens assistant head coach, and Aaron Glenn, the Lions defensive coordinator. Those are the guys who really are still out there and in play. Eric Bieniemy was the offensive coordinator there last year. Don't see him being in the mix for the head coaching job. The team also could decide, hey, we're the last team now to have an opening. Do we want to go consider anybody else? Is that even possible? That's also an option. They're having discussions this afternoon because really you'd like to get an assistant coaching staff in place, but there's no rush right now. There's nobody they're competing with for a head coach anymore, so you might as well take the time that you need to make the best possible decision on an organization that already was quick out of the gate to hire Adam Peters as its general manager. They struck early and fast. That was the guy they wanted. They got their general manager. So there's no need to rush into a decision at head coach until they feel like they're entirely comfortable, which they haven't been to date.
Now, the only problem I have with waiting is I have the nightmares of Jim Zorn. If you don't remember that, after the 2007 season, Joe Gibbs last in his second go-round after they lost to Seattle in the playoffs, Gibbs resigned. Still had a year left on his contract. And Gibbs has said this in recent years that Dan Snyder stayed on the phone with him until 2:30 in the morning trying to talk him out of it. But he resigned at that point and retired from football for good. And so they focused on Steve Spagnuolo, who is back in the Super Bowl as the defensive coordinator of the Chiefs, but at the time was the defensive coordinator of the Giants. And they had to wait until they were finished with the Super Bowl. And he went in for the interview with Dan Snyder and Vinny Cerrato. He had to stay at Snyder's house. And he went through the interview process, and he said, I don't want to work for these schmucks. And he went back to New York. And he eventually got a head coaching job with the Rams. That didn't work out and has been a successful defensive coordinator ever since. Jim Fossil had been an early candidate to replace Gibbs that year, and it looked like that was going to happen. And what he had done was he said to them, okay, if I get this job, I'm going to hire Jim Zorn as my offensive coordinator. I've never heard of this happening anyplace else, but Danny and Vinny went ahead and hired Jim Zorn as the offensive coordinator before they hired Fossil. And so here's Zorn going into the office and looking at cut-ups and stuff like that, the things people do. He was not qualified even to be an offensive coordinator. Been a longtime quarterbacks coach in Seattle, but he was not offensive coordinator material. But he's got the job, okay, so he's doing that. And then he gets a call. Oh, yeah, Steve Spagnuolo doesn't want it. Would you like to come over and interview? And Zorn went out and bought a suit, schlepped over to Danny's house, and signed a contract, I think without an agent. It's more money than he never made in his life. It was a 3-year deal for $9 million. He worked 2 of those years and collected another $3 million check after he was fired. That was a disaster. So the idea of waiting doesn't really appeal to me. Now, there are 2 big-name candidates still out there. Bill Belichick wants to coach. Heck, Pete Carroll wants to coach. They're both in their 70s. Mike Vrabel's younger. He's in his 50s, and this is a real head-scratcher. Most people didn't expect him to be fired in Tennessee. Now he's out in Tennessee, and nobody wants him. I would at least talk to him. It would seem that there'd be interest, but I'm sure, and this is something that they haven't had before, a qualified GM, and that's the real encouraging part of this, is that Adam Peters has worked in successful organizations, the New England Patriots, the San Francisco 49ers, and I'm sure he's having a major say in all of this. Now, he obviously hasn't been successful in attracting their top candidates because one of them decided to go back to being an assistant coach in Detroit, and the other one is now the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. So he has not been able to entice anybody so far to come here. But it must mean, well, Belichick would be one thing. Belichick, I don't think if you're Adam Peters, there's any way you can hire Belichick. You might be able to get Vrabel and say, we just want you to coach, not be the CEO of the team. And to be fair, by the way, to Dan Quinn, because you're seeing a lot of stuff about, this is just Ron Rivera all over again. It's a guy who failed as a head coach, who got a team to a Super Bowl, didn't get it done, and you're just bringing in, kind of a retread situation. Ron Rivera, had he been allowed to just coach, if that would have been the job, just to coach, he might not have been as big a failure as he was. He was a terrible CEO, and he even admitted that. I mean, he was doing things he shouldn't have been doing, and it was that coach-centric operation that Dan Snyder had trotted out when he wished everybody a happy Thanksgiving on the 2nd of January. That did not work for him. Dan Quinn, as just a coach, might work. And at this point, even though Schefter says they could draw it out for a while, you still have to put together your staff. You're still competing with other teams for top coordinators. And if you're going to bring in Dan Quinn, you got to have a top offensive coordinator. And if you're going to stick with Eric Bieniemy, I don't know how many people are going to be thrilled about that. So this is now starting to get a little bit tight under the collar, and people are starting to schwitz a little bit about this. Let me just get to what Lovero's got in his column today about what Ben Johnson has decided to do. He points out that the Lions haven't won a championship since 1957. So if, in fact, what Johnson said when he announced he was saying in Detroit he wants to win a Super Bowl. Well, they're a long way from doing that. And he also reminds us that Dan Campbell on Sunday said to reporters that they may not get this far again. You know, it's going to be a lot harder next year when people start to shoot for them. Teams that lose in the NFC Championship game or AFC Championship game, it's not guaranteed they're going to get that far again. Now, here's more from Livero on this whole fiasco with Ben Johnson. He says there have been several reports that Johnson, with supposedly a $15 million annual price tag, may have turned off suitors with those salary demands. So was the vaunted Commanders search committee flying out to Detroit for a second interview with Johnson to tell him he costs too much? Good point, right? I mean, if they were hesitant about the price, why were they going out there to interview him? More from Livero. If new Washington general manager Adam Peters really wanted Campbell to be his coach, he would have let new owner Josh Harris let money stand in the way. I think it was Johnson. I think that's a misprint. If new Washington general manager Adam Peters really wanted Johnson to be his head coach, would new owner Josh Harris let money stand in the way? After all, this isn't how it's supposed to work. The GM picks the coach. The owner says, too expensive. There's no salary cap on spending on coaches, no restrictions on how much you can pay your head coach other than your own purse strings. And then he goes back to last year. Remember, Johnson was in this spot last year, and he withdrew his name from consideration for jobs in Indianapolis and Houston and turned down an in-person interview with the Carolina Panthers and spoke to a reporter last year about it. And this is Johnson speaking last year. He said, talked to my wife. We just came to a really good decision of, hey, you know, we're really happy here. We love where we are. We love being in Detroit, love the people here, and just decided to go ahead and put the brakes on right now. Just wasn't the time for us. I think some people, I just can't speak on a personal level, some people, they have really wanted to climb as fast as they can. I know particularly young coaches that want to do that. That's not been the case for me per se. I want to be around football. I want to win football games. I want to be around good people. And when I finally get a chance to step back and take a deep breath and look at it, that was the most important thing. Okay, but you better hope that the Lions keep winning. You know, Mike McDaniel turned down some jobs early on because he wanted to stay where he was, and he was younger. But in this case, I don't know how well that's going to work out for Ben Johnson. So interesting thoughts on that. Meantime, the Orioles sale. And Tony and Mike had a chance to weigh in on that last night on PTI. Both of them very familiar with the circumstances here. And this was their take on the sale of the team to David Rubenstein.
The Angelos family bought the O's more than 30 years ago for $173 million and announced this afternoon an agreement to sell the team for nearly 10 times that much, $1.725 billion, to a group led by Baltimore native David Rubenstein. Tony, this transaction would take place over time, but assuming it gets approved, what could it mean for the Orioles?
I think it really helps the Orioles. John Angelos, who's been running the team for a while, doesn't have a single big money guy on there, and they still won 101 games. They've won it by going to their farm system and developing their farm system. And John Angelos, though, has not gone into the free agent market, and he is very cautious about spending money. These new guys have billions of dollars, and they're going to spend some money. I want to make it clear, I'm not saying I think John Angelos is a bad owner. I don't. But he's been extremely cautious. They've got young, great players like the catcher, Adley Rutschman, like an infielder, what's Gunner's last name? Gunnar Henderson. I think he may have been Rookie of the Year. You want to lock them up for a long-term deal, okay? And they don't have a single guy on their roster signed to a multi-year contract since November of 2018. So this is going to be good for the Orioles.
Tony, I don't know if this is going to be good. Caution is not the worst word in the world. How has it been for the New York Mets? How's it been for them to have an owner who would go into the tax and spend all the money he has? It hasn't done nothing.
Didn't work
I'm not
out.
Saying it won't.
1 year,
I'm not
didn't
saying,
work out. Yeah.
Right. Okay, but we've seen teams spend a lot of money and not work. Yes, the Yankees and the Red Sox, notably in the Dodgers, they have been in that upper echelon of teams that get to the postseason year after year after year, and the Braves too, after year after year after year. And money, there's a direct correlation. I get it. Good for Baltimore. Look, I just like seeing great baseball in Baltimore where You and I have seen it up close. We've been in that ballpark. We've been in that city when
great
the
ballpark.
summers are hot and the team is
great city, Mike.
Great baseball.
It's like Cincinnati. It's a small city that loves baseball.
Yes, and Milwaukee,
the fans
there's
have come
still
back,
a few of those.
and they've done a great job on the rebuild there. The GM, Elias, and the manager, they've done a great job on the rebuild. So I'm happy for them. I wish David Rubenstein had bought the Washington Nationals. I wish that had happened.
And that leads to a very interesting question about the television deal. Chelsea Janes, Washington Post, had this. Now, we've been talking about this for quite a while, the possible sale of the Orioles. It's in Peter Angelos' will that the team be sold after he dies. Apparently, this is happening before he passes away, but he's got dementia. Nobody's seen him for 10 years. And what Tom Loverro had been saying about that is if the team is sold, the Masson deal goes away. Not necessarily, according to Chelsea Janes of the Post. According to the agreement that Major League Baseball made with the Orioles when the Nationals moved in 2005 from Montreal to here, the Orioles control the television rights in perpetuity, though they're obligated to pay Washington fair market value each year. And they've been in court for decades about this. I mean, they've been fighting back and forth over a decade about this. The deal states that in the event that either the Orioles, the Nationals, or the regional sports network are sold, all subsequent purchasers, assignees, or transferees shall be unconditionally bound to all terms and conditions of this agreement. In other words, Rubenstein would inherit the Nationals' television rights along with those of the Orioles. But she writes there has been long optimism and speculation among interested parties that a potential sale of the Orioles could open the door to some arrangement as a condition of approval of the deal. Neither Major League Baseball nor the Nationals were willing to comment on such a possibility, and Major League Baseball has long made clear that the existing agreement is binding. Now, remember, David Rubenstein was reportedly going to partner with Ted Leonsis to buy the Nationals. Masson is a dying entity. Cable TV networks are hurting all over the country, and a lot of them have folded up, and some of them have been absorbed by Amazon. I mean, it's not good times for regional television networks. So I'm wondering about this. Is it possible that Rubenstein, who may or may not have had business dealings with Leonsis, I imagine they know each other, they travel in the same circles, is it possible that in some way, the television deal goes over to Ted's Monumental network because they do have the two channels, and it would be possible on Monumental to televise both the Orioles and the Nationals. Now, I don't know if Monumental has an outlet in Baltimore anymore. Used to be that was the way it was. NBC Sports Washington was in both cities. I don't know if Monumental is still there. Maybe because, you can attract the Baltimore market for Caps and Wizards games, so that would make sense. So, might make sense for the whole Masson deal to fold up, or Ted buys it from Rubenstein. That could happen as well. There's all kinds of interesting angles to this. And one other, you may have heard that Cal Ripken is going to be involved in that, in this deal, and that makes total sense. If you're going to buy the Orioles, you want to have Cal Ripken involved for sure. And he said in a statement yesterday, I'm excited to once again be part of the Orioles organization, and I thank David for including me in the ownership group. The Orioles have been a big part of my life since I was a child. This is a special day. Remember, Cal retired after the 2001 season, so it took 23 years to get him back in. That's terrible, but good. Good that he's coming back. Also, as part of this ownership group, you may not have heard this, Grant Hill is going to be involved, and former Baltimore Mayor Kurt Schmoke and New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who's a billionaire. So there's a lot of money going into this, a lot of names going into this, and you might say, well, what's with Grant Hill? You might not know this, but his dad, Calvin Hill, who was a great football player in the NFL, played at Yale, he's from Baltimore. That's where he grew up. So, and I think he's been on the board with the Orioles before. Now, Grant Hill has a hell of a lot more money than Calvin Hill, and so he's becoming an investor in this as well. So there's a lot of great things happening in that organization, a lot of great people getting involved, and to have Cal Ripken and Grant Hill, two of the great athletes of our area, and two of the people who have been held up as great citizens, great people. That's a great thing for that organization. So things are pointing up, and I'm going to be very interested to see what develops with the Masson situation, because the whole cable TV streaming, the whole industry is undergoing massive change, and Ted likes to stay on top of this, and he's in front of it. I'm sure Rubenstein is very well connected, but I think we're going to see a massive change on that, and the traditional way that we've been watching Orioles and Nats games over the last almost 20 years, I think that's going to change, and I think that's what's going to happen with the Masson deal. Speaking of television, Greg Olsen kind of in the eye of the storm with Tom Brady saying, "Oh no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be in the booth. I'm going to be the number one analyst on the number one team next year with Kevin Burkhardt, and it's not going to be a three-man booth. It's going to be Kevin and me." So here's Olsen, who's known that this was going to happen, but recently has gotten a lot of flowers thrown in his direction, and he's saying, okay, you can put Tom in the booth, but you're not necessarily going to kick me to the curb. We'll get to that and what he said to Dan Patrick yesterday. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
You know, it was 20 years ago today that we had the famous wardrobe malfunction with Janet Jackson. Yeah, I was at that game. I was in Houston, that Super Bowl. It was the New England Patriots against the Carolina Panthers. Believe it or not, the Carolina Panthers 20 years ago were good enough to get to a Super Bowl, and I'll have memories of that, plus the follow-up on what was a huge, huge deal across the country, and many thought it would change the way broadcasting was done. I mean, the impact that it had on this industry was massive, and we'll get to that. Tony's got a show coming up at 11 o'clock today. Greg Olsen, who's, I don't know where he is right now in terms of on the pecking order of Fox, because going into this past season, it was announced that Tom Brady had a deal to go into the booth, and I think he had signed the deal while he was still playing in Tampa. So the deal was he would go into the Fox booth, be in the number one team with Kevin Burkhardt as soon as he retired. And Greg Olsen at that time, during what would have been the 2022 season, kind of understood it because things were happening across the industry. Buck and Aikman got a lot of money to go from Fox to ESPN, and it was an arms race with money for the top names, and he understood. Yeah, you got Tom Brady. I got to step aside. Well, Brady decided he was going to take a year off. He wasn't going to go right into the booth, so he didn't do any broadcasting this past year. And Olsen gave some, very self-deprecating comments like, I'll just keep the seat warm for Tom, and I'll be happy to move over, when he's ready to go. Well, over the course of this past season, the bloom was already coming off the rose for Tony Romo. And now it seems to be completely off the rose. All bloom is off. And Greg Olsen, having done the Super Bowl this past year, which was the most watched Super Bowl of all time, 115 million people just in this country, and he got a lot of credit for doing a great job on that game. And over the course of this season, has gotten even more credit, and then did this past Sunday's game, Detroit and San Francisco, which had a record audience of 57 million people. And so now it's like, well, here comes Brady, but hey, and his attitude seemingly has changed too. Like, yeah, I understand that this was a deal and Tom is moving in, but I'm not so anxious to shrink in the corner here. I mean, I got a resume here. I put out some really good work over the past couple of years. And I'm not interested in being, well, essentially a backup. He would go to the number 2 team on Fox if this all goes through. So yesterday he's on the Dan Patrick Show, and he laid out his case to be a number 1 analyst. The problem he's got outside of Fox, you have NBC, which has Chris Collinsworth. You have ESPN, which has Troy Aikman. And you have CBS, which has, yes, Tony Romo, who the bloom may be off the rose, but he's still got, I think, 5 years left on that deal that pays him $17 million a year. CBS is not going to eat that money. So where's he going to go? He's not saying, but he's making a case for himself to have one of those prime jobs. Here's Olsen yesterday with Dan Patrick.
I want to call top games. Dan, I feel, 2 years ago when everything unfolded and, obviously I've known Tom was coming for, over, 2 years, year and a half, whatever you want to call it. And, that part of it, we always knew. It was a matter of when. We didn't know exactly when the timeline. It ended up not coming this past season, which gave me a second year with Kevin in the booth with the A team. But, going forward, my goals haven't changed. My goals when I started out calling games with Fox, 3 years ago, was I aspired to be a top broadcaster. I really thought I could do it. I thought if given the opportunity and the chance, I could show people that I could do it. And I got the opportunity, and Fox was kind enough to give me that. And I think over the last 2 years, we've really changed the narrative. I think we've changed where, hey, this is just a placeholder. This is a guy, to being like, no, this guy can do it. So my goals and aspirations, if anything, have even gotten more committed to, I want to call top games. I want to call games in front of 57 million people and dive into the biggest moments and why it's happening. And I feel like we've done as good a job as that as anybody in the industry over the last couple seasons. And where that is, how that is, when that is, I don't know, right? There's so many moving parts out of my control, but my goal is to be a top A broadcaster again. And I'm going to do everything in my power to achieve that. And that's been the goal that I've laid out since I entered this field upon retirement 3 years ago.
Would you ask for a trade?
I'm not really in the business of making demands. I'm not sitting here holding anyone's feet to the fire. Fox understands the position I'm in. They understand what my aspirations are. And, we're not sitting there banging the table and saying, you have to let us, we're not in that. We're not doing that. We understand what we signed up for. They understand where I am and being at this stage of my career of where I want to go. And I think we understand the delicate situation that we're in, right? I understand when Tom Brady's looming over your shoulder, it's the biggest news in sports. I get it. He's Tom Brady. He's someone I've respected for 20 years. So I understand the uniqueness of what's going on. And I feel like we've handled it as well as we could for the last 2 years. And if I can get another opportunity to call top games at Fox or somewhere else, we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, it's ticklish now. It's a lot different than, it's okay. I understand the greatest of all time is coming in. I'm going to go to number 2. He's not going. Now, there might be one opening, and that would be on the Thursday night games on Prime with Al Michaels. I don't know how thrilled they are with Kirk Herbstreit. Maybe they are happy with him. It really never seemed like Al and Kirk connected all that well, and Herbstreit has this, and a well-deserved reputation as the college guy. He's kind of like what Jay Billis as college basketball, he is to college football, and then he's doing these NFL games. He could go there, but I don't know if that's the best career move for him. He might be better off staying at number 2 at Fox and then just see what shakes out. Maybe NBC is ready to pull the trigger on Collinsworth. He's older. He's about 64, 65 now. Maybe they want somebody younger in there with Mike Tirico. I don't know. But, it has transformed from this great humility of, I understand, I know, I'll just take my place in the number. He also got to take a pay cut. That's another part of this. I guess after all the praise he's gotten at the end of the season, I don't think he's going to take the pay cut. But, yeah, his salary is supposed to be cut maybe even in half when he goes from the number 1 spot. And he's not making anywhere near what Tony Romo makes. So it is a very, very ticklish situation. Meantime, this I found interesting. This is kind of taking you behind the curtain. Here's Olsen telling Dan Patrick how it works in the booth, how he's able to do his job, and how it works as a game analyst on a network broadcast.
All right, so I have my telestrator, which is like the production. That's what everyone sees on their TV at home, right? I have no bearing on that. That just is just a copy of whatever's being broadcast into the homes. I have a Sky Cam, which is like, the cable cam behind the quarterback. So I have that monitor, and then I have an all 22. But those are all on delays. So they're on about a 4-second delay from what's actually happening on the field. So I watch it live on the field, which in essence is like an all 22, like, from above. And then I see it. And then by the time Kevin is done with his call, I can then either go to the all 22 or the Sky based on what I want to see. And then I can either confirm, I can finalize numbers, make sure what I saw live is actually what I see. And then by the time it's on my telestrator, by the time it's Kevin is done and I got to jump in to talk, I have a pretty good sense. I saw it live. I saw it on a quick little 4-second delay. So I'm pretty certain that what I'm going to say is what happened, and doesn't always play out that way, but that's the method that I've developed in the booth the last couple of years. And it's helped me just make sure what I say I'm confident is what really happened.
And players will talk about the game slows down when you play the game. Like after a couple of years, you eventually see it differently. Quarterbacks talk about it. It slows down a little bit. As a broadcaster, did it slow down for you where it became easier?
Oh, absolutely. In my first year, I think I always joke now with our producer, Z. I always say, like, when I first started doing this, I only had like a couple camera angles, and it was probably for the best. They probably had more. They just didn't want to overwhelm me. So my replays were, behind the defense, behind the offense, every once in a while, an all 22, like from above, or just like an ISO shot. It's just, all right, it's going to be on, CeeDee Lamb, or it's going to be on, whoever. That was it. And I would just do my telestrations and but then as I kept going, I realized, oh my God, there's a million more cameras, and you just get more comfortable. You get more fluid. Hey, whatever they throw up on the telestrator, it's not going to catch me off guard anymore. But watching the plays unfold on the field was always very natural to me. I'll tell you, the biggest transition, Dan, that I had was, for my whole career watching game film, I would always watch it from behind the offense. So that was my perspective of seeing NFL football forever. And now we sometimes do it from behind the defense. They call it pit, or you do it from like a corner sideline so you want to talk about the left guard, but now you're doing it from behind the defense. So he's actually on the right. And, so like little things like that, I had to like retrain my brain that, okay, for 14 years, you watched film like this. Well, this isn't film. This is live television, and we're not going to just show the same camera angle for 3 hours every weekend. So little things like that you get better at. And, my team spent a lot of time with me, helping me progress through a lot of those things early on.
I don't know about you, but I found that to be very interesting. Yeah, they different camera angles that he has to work with. And when you're watching the game, you just kind of get the feel, with not just with Olsen, but all the good ones, that they're just watching in the same time frame that you are. What he's giving you after Kevin Burkhardt completes the play, he's giving you narration of what he's seeing like 4 seconds later on the screen. Plus, he's got to work with the producers on getting highlights that he wants to emphasize, the telestrator part of that. It's a pretty intense job, and if you do it well, it doesn't come across that way on TV, that you come across in a relaxed way. And I'm sure a lot of football players watch these games and go, "Gee, I can do that. I can do that." And I guess to Brady's credit, he is working with Burkhardt. He's, as I said this yesterday, it's kind of like you're married, but your wife is dating Brad Pitt. It's like and this has been going on while they're doing games. So each week, Olsen comes into the booth and he looks at his partner, Kevin Burkhardt, and he goes, "Oh, you're staying and you're getting a more attractive partner, and I'm going to be kicked to the curb." So that was interesting. But that to me is a lot tougher than it would seem to be. And Olsen, again, does a good job with that. Last thing is Olsen as a former tight end and also an analyst. And this was a huge storyline going into the Super Bowl last year, and it's an enormous storyline going into the Super Bowl this year. And that is Travis Kelce. We said the same thing a year ago. How the hell does he get open all the time? He was 10 for 10 in the first half against Baltimore on 10 targets. And then he caught a pass in the third quarter, so he's 11 for 11, and then I don't think they threw to him again the rest of the game just because of the way things unfolded. And they were able to run the ball a little bit, and Baltimore shot itself in the foot with turnovers and things like that. But this is Olsen, tight end, former tight end, played 14 years in the NFL, good tight end, on stopping the one who right now is the GOAT, Travis Kelce.
It's hard. What he's doing is unprecedented. And, I've been on record calling his games and said it on broadcast. And I think we're starting. I never thought anyone would ever catch Tony Gonzalez. From a production standpoint, from a longevity of his career and what he was able to do was pretty remarkable when you saw Tony compared to the, 2, 3, 4 guys as far as production and what he was able to accomplish over a long time. I think Kelsey's either arrived already or he's nipping at his heels, because he should have had 8,000 yard seasons in a row. He didn't play in the last game. I think he needed like 15 yards. So in essence, he was going to get it. It wasn't that big of a deal to him. His playoff records, I mean, when you're breaking Jerry Rice's records, you're entering a new stratosphere of production in the postseason. But as far as stopping him, I don't know if you're ever going to like completely shut him down. I do think the challenge of Kelsey is he's not running conventional routes that you can really prepare for. It's not, hey, he's going to run 14 yards and hook a left and he's going to catch this ball 2 yards outside the hash mark. So on your zone drops, drop there, right? You're not, because if you drop there, he's going to stop his route and end somewhere else. Like, he's playing improv, in the moment, real-time decision route running, and Mahomes sees it the exact same way. So it's very hard. So how I would defend him is, I think you got to get on him. I think the more space he has to run and weave and find feel, him and Mahomes are just playing at a different level than maybe anybody ever. So I think you got to get on him. I think you got to reroute him. I think you've got to be at the line of scrimmage, getting them with people behind you to help. I don't think this is like, hey, one zone coverage, one concept, one player. This is a group effort, and you have to be really good in critical downs, because when it matters the most, Mahomes is throwing him the ball. So you better have an answer for him, and very few teams have.
That's quite a statement. Best combo ever. You think of, well, Steve Young and Jerry Rice and Montana and Rice, and there have been others all over the years. But what he's telling you is there is such mental telepathy between Patrick Mahomes and Jason Kelsey that Kelsey may have a route that he's supposed to do, but he'll look at the coverage and he'll say, well, I'm going to break it off this way, and he knows that Mahomes is going to be watching him. And that's another thing about the brilliance of Mahomes. What makes him so great is the ability to see the field as he does and to make decisions quickly. That's the whole ball of wax. And as we evaluate Sam Howell and his development, that's always been an issue for him. He does not make decisions as quickly as he needs to make them, thus all the sacks this past year. And if he's ever going to become at a higher level of quarterback, and he may never. I mean, he's good enough to stay around the league for a while. But if he wants to be a starting quarterback in the NFL, that's the thing he has to do. And you don't necessarily have to have a Travis Kelce to help you do that. But if you have one, it certainly helps. And the two of them, just unbelievable what they've been able to do with now their 4th Super Bowl appearance in the 6 years that Patrick Mahomes has been the starter. Coming up in the next hour, more on the NBA. Jim Jackson, who does analysis for Clippers games and also does college basketball on the Big Ten Network. Very good. The question about Kobe's 81. We've seen last week 2 guys go for more than 70 and 2 for 62. Is the 81 that Kobe put up in jeopardy? Could somebody 15 years later, whatever it is, could somebody actually surpass that the way scoring is going? Jim Jackson answering that question as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. What I have been calling the Joe Buck interviews that have been popping up on YouTube like popcorn over the last few weeks. Apparently they weren't all done by Joe Buck. A lot of them have, and I've played a whole bunch of them. I've got one set for tomorrow where we talk to Joe Theismann. They're about 55 minutes, 50 minutes, and they go through the player or the coach's career. I love to do these kind of podcasts. I've done them in the past, and I love watching these things. So I watch 1 or 2 a day and pull out the highlights and pass them along to you on the radio show here. And today it's Rod Woodson, but it's actually Rod Woodson with Dan Patrick. I didn't know this, but I guess Dan was a part of this as well, and he did these hour interviews. He's a great interview as well as Joe Buck. They both do a tremendous job with that. So we'll play Rod Woodson, who finally won his Super Bowl with the Baltimore Ravens, played 10 years with the Steelers, and when you think of Rod Woodson as a Hall of Famer, you probably think of him as a Steeler, but he did come to the Ravens and with some other veteran players helped them to win that Super Bowl after the 2000 season and finished up his career with the Raiders. Some real good stories about growing up in Indiana, and there's a story in there about Lee Corso, which we'll get to in about 20 minutes, that I find to be mind-blowing, just absolutely incredible. We talked about what's going on with the coach search, and if anything happens, I'm checking Twitter and the wires and things like that. But it does appear now that we can grab a Snickers because the Commanders are not competing with anybody to get a coach. All the other teams have head coaches at this point, with Mike McDonald taking the Seahawks job yesterday. And the names that are left, it appears, Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, and having him in the mix meant it wasn't a completely wasted trip for the Josh Harris group when they went out to Detroit on Tuesday, expecting to talk to him and Aaron Glenn, Ben McDonald and Aaron Glenn, and McDonald supposedly pulled out while the group was in the air to come talk to him, which really doesn't sound great. But anyway, Glenn is still in the mix. Dan Quinn of Dallas, he's been here for an interview and a couple of interviews, I believe. And then Anthony Weaver of the Baltimore Ravens is still in the mix, and he's a defensive line coach but has served as assistant head coach. Experience on both sides of the ball, might be a good candidate, young, 43. And then Eric Bieniemy, who's here and has been interviewed for the job and is the only offensive name that's still floating out there. We'll see. But so far, no smoke signals coming from Ashburn, and it could be a while. The biggest problem really is not the head coach situation, because those guys aren't going anywhere. There's no other place to go. But you got to assemble a staff. You've got all-star games. You've got the Senior Bowl coming up. The draft preparation. Now, it looks like Martin Mayhew is going to stay and work with Adam Peters. They've worked together before in San Francisco, so that group is going to stay. Maybe even Marty Herney will stay part of the staff, but they're all going to answer to Adam Peters. And that's the one comforting thing about this, is at least they've got a competent GM in charge. And as they look for a coach, he's guiding it rather than the impetuous Dan Snyder, who would just chase big names, or when he was through chasing a big name and it didn't work out, he turned to Jim Zorn. Just stupid stuff. So good thing that's over with. As far as who comes in, there's no. As I said yesterday, when Joe Gibbs was hired, he was known a little bit because he had been the offensive coordinator of the Air Coryell offense, the high-flying offense that the San Diego Chargers had. But nobody knew him as a head coach, and he'd never been a head coach before anywhere, not even in high school. He had started out as an assistant coach in college and went with Don Coryell to the NFL, working with the St. Louis Cardinals, and then I think he spent some time with the Tampa Bay Bucks. Yeah, he did, because he was the one that convinced them to draft Doug Williams, and then was in San Diego with Coryell again as the offensive coordinator when he showed up here. And a lot of people said, Joe who? There was talk that they were going to bring George Allen back after they fired Jack Pardee. But it worked out. So while it doesn't look great now that they're two top choices within the last few days, one of them said Ben McDonald, not Ben, I'm always doing that. It's Mike McDonald. One said, nope, Seattle's a better job. I'm going there. And the other one, Ben Johnson, said, no, I'm going to stay in Detroit and stick around there another year and try and win a Super Bowl. So there's that. Super Bowl hype. Sports Illustrated. Yes, I have in front of me an actual SI magazine, February 2024 edition. The whole operation seems to be teetering right now with all the employees getting notices that they're going to be fired, or it's a big battle going on. But there is still some life in the old gal, and they still have beautiful color pictures in there, and their photo archive is fabulous since it's now, 70 years old, right? SI started in 1954, so it's 70 years old. And what they did in this edition, which I'm going to pass along here, is they went over the 50 most influential teams of all time. This is Super Bowl 58, so they could have ranked the top 57 NFL teams that won Super Bowls, and they've done that in the past. And in some of these polls, the 91 Redskins are considered to be the best of the Super Bowl era, believe it or not. Yeah, that's the last one that they won, but that team was awesome, with Mark Rippon getting sacked only 7 times all year. But this is the most impactful, influential teams of the history of the NFL, which is now 104 years old. So of all the teams that have played, these are the 50, and some of them predate the Super Bowl. Over the last 104 years, they rate more than 2,300 teams have competed in the NFL and the AFL. Set out to find which of those have had the most lasting impact. A panel of 31 experts cast their votes, yielding a list filled with dynasties, upstarts, history makers, and innovators. And I'm really impressed by this panel. I know some of these people, and that's as good a panel, I think, as you can put together. Ernie Accorsi, former GM of the Colts, the Browns, and the Giants. Howard Balzer, been with the Sporting News forever. Jared Bell's been with USA Today as their top football writer for years. Albert Breer of SI. Vic Carucci, who's been operating out of Buffalo for a long time. I know him. Greg Cosell, who breaks down film and has been with NFL Films for like 40 years. Bob Glauber, who I knew back in his days with Newsday, and is a Pro Football Hall of Fame voter. He's now retired, but one of the top football writers of his time. Rick Goslin of the Dallas Morning News, same thing. Joe Horrigan, who was the curator of the Pro Football Hall of Fame for a long time, and a really good guy and a smart guy about football. Peter King, who's acknowledged to be one of the best. Michael McCambridge wrote, I think, the book about the NFL and the history of it. It's called America's Game. If you get a copy of it, read it. It's great. John McCain, who's been covering Houston sports for the Chronicle for a long, long time. Bill Polian, former general manager. Louis Riddick's on the committee. Trey Wingo, who I know. This is a good panel. So I'm really impressed with what they were able to put together. But this is what they have, and there are only two Washington teams on this list. Again, it's not best, but most impactful. And the two Washington teams that are on there, one of them is the 1937 Washington Redskins. That was the first Washington team as they moved from Boston with a rookie by the name of Sammy Baugh. And the other one is the 1987 team, which was quarterbacked by Doug Williams and won the Super Bowl. And for obvious reasons, the first African-American quarterback to start a Super Bowl and the first one to win one. And I guess one of the most memorable things about that was during the news conferences during the week, somebody allegedly asked Doug Williams, how long have you been a black quarterback? That's not what happened. He was asked by someone who had covered him at Grambling. He said, Doug, obviously you've been a black quarterback your whole life. When did it start to matter? But in the days when not everything was recorded, when you didn't have cell phone cameras constantly rolling, there's no video of it, and it got out in a little notes column as some idiot at the press conference asked him, how long have you been a black quarterback? That wasn't the case. But they are ranked on this list of the most impactful teams of all time, number 13 of all time. It says, having entered the 1987 season with Jay Schrader as his signal caller, Coach Joe Gibbs turned to Doug Williams when it mattered most. Despite making just 2 regular season starts, people forget that. People forget that Doug Williams that season only started 2 regular season games. Played quarterback throughout the playoffs, leading 3rd seed Washington to the Super Bowl with wins over the Bears and Vikings. Williams became the first black quarterback to start and win a Super Bowl, earning MVP honors after throwing 4 touchdowns in the second quarter. And there's a great soundbite from Sam Huff, and he says, at the end of that game, that ought to put to rest the feelings of the black quarterback. And I think it did pave the way for what we have now, and the best quarterback in the game is black. And many of the top, Lamar Jackson is going to be the MVP for the second time. And Doug Williams really, paved the way for that. He wasn't the first black quarterback, but he was the first to get to a Super Bowl, and that really mattered. The Sammy Baugh team, the 1937 team, they are ranked, what are they ranked, 26th, 27th, something like that. And they're ranked that high because of the influence of the passing game that Sammy Baugh brought into the league. The top 10, let me go backwards on that. The top 10 of the most influential teams. Number 10 is the 61 Green Bay Packers. This was the first of 5 title teams for Vince Lombardi. Remember, in his second year as coach of the team, they lost the championship game to the Philadelphia Eagles, and he said, I will never lose a championship game again. And he didn't. Went on to win 5, including the first 2 Super Bowls. It was a running team with Jim Taylor and Paul Hornung. The 61 Packers gave up the second fewest points in the league, and that's how they did it. Tough defense and a tough running game, and showed the way for teams of the future, like what the Giants were able to do with their 2 Super Bowls under Bill Parcells. That was the formula for them as well. Number 9 is the 2001 Patriots, and that's the one where Tom Brady comes in a couple of games into the season, doesn't lose his job. Drew Bledsoe remains on the bench and had to be traded at the end of the year. But that was also, it's a very emotional one, too, because that happened in 9/11, and the Super Bowl in New Orleans actually had to be delayed a week. The number 8 team is the 1946 Rams, mainly because they had 2 African-American stars, Woody Strode and Kenny Washington. This is now 47 is the year that baseball integrates. 46 to have 2 black players on the same team. That's a big deal at that time. The 1974 Steelers, number 7 as the most impactful, mainly because of the draft that they had that year. They won the Super Bowl, but the players that they drafted in that one singular draft, you got 4 Hall of Famers, Lynn Swann, John Stallworth, Jack Lambert, and Mike Webster. Nobody's ever going to have a draft like that again. The scouting is much more sophisticated than it was then. The number 6 team, the 81 San Francisco 49ers. This is a couple of years after Bill Walsh took over what may have been the worst team in the league, and they surprised people with that West Coast offense, had the famous game where Dwight Clark makes the catch against the Cowboys, and they go on to win the Super Bowl. Number 5, and I would put them higher than this, the 85 Bears. I don't think I've ever seen a defense like that. Just staggering how good they were defensively. That's the number 5 most impactful team of all time. Number 4, for my time, 1950 Cleveland Browns, coached by Paul Brown. Paul Brown was a real innovator. He's the guy that started using game film, turned it into a full-time job for his players, had messenger guards sending in plays. Quarterback didn't call the plays. Amazing. Number 3, the only undefeated team of all time, the 72 Dolphins that won the Super Bowl against the Redskins. The number 2 team, most impactful, the 1958 Baltimore Colts, mainly because of what that overtime win did and turning the nation on to pro football. That ushered football into the modern age of television in 1958. And Amici, there was also the first overtime game in the history of the league. They had ties during the regular season, and it was the first time that they had to use the coin flip to determine who would kick off, and they would play till there was somebody scoring, and it was the Colts that scored. Even after they had lost the toss, they stopped the Giants and got the touchdown. And then the New York Jets of 1968 with Joe Namath, which legitimized the merger. So it's an interesting list and good to look at. A couple of basketball things from Jim Jackson, who was on yesterday with Dan Patrick. And last week we saw 2 players score 70 or more, and 2 of them score 62 in losses. Where are we going with this scoring? And maybe Wilt's 100 will never be touched, but what about Kobe Bryant's 81, which happened in this century? This is Jim Jackson, former player in the NBA, really good player, now does color commentary for the Clippers broadcast, also on the Big Ten Network. He's got one who he thinks might have a shot at topping Kobe's 81.
Embiid, you can't stop him. Okay. You cannot stop Embiid. If he wants to get to a spot, if he wants to post you up, he's going to get to the free throw. You can't. It's no physical matchup in the league that can take away if he's really determined. If he wants to put the ball in the hoop, nobody. Because he, unlike Giannis, he can step out and knock down the three, shooting like 37% from 3-point line. He shoots plus 80% from the free throw line. Well, I mean, what are you going to take away? If he's really determined and the team is really determined to get him the ball, what are you going to do? I mean, that's you can't stop it.
Embiid's hurt now, but it could come to something like that they decide one night we're going to get him. Washington would be a good opponent to try that. He's had, I think he had, what do you have, over 50 points and didn't even play in the fourth quarter in one of the earlier games. Now, with load management and all that stuff, I don't think they'd keep him out on the court for 48 minutes like Wilt and Kobe did that night. But, it might be something that they might want to shoot for, and Washington would be a good team to shoot for it against, although they play a little better defensively lately. The other thing from Jim Jackson is the Luka Doncic incident. It was either last week or the week before, where he was getting heckled in Phoenix, and some guy was yelling, "Get on a treadmill," and Luka didn't like it, and he asked security to have him removed. The guy left voluntarily because it was a blowout. Phoenix was winning. And so Jackson was asked about that incident and could it actually lead to more like it. Luka, by the way, did apologize later for that, said he shouldn't have had the guy removed. But this is Jackson's take on that, and he has a local reference here. Listen carefully.
Luka's sensitive from the perspective of listen, you got rabbit ears. You hear and see everything. Today you can't. In today's world with social media and everything, you can't get away with it. Don't say that you don't listen. You don't. I don't know. It's impossible. It is, whether that's somebody telling you that or you pop open your X feed or Instagram, whatever it may be, you're gonna hear it. Local, whatever it is. So whether that the fuel to the fire was the fact that now it's a lot easier for players to get fans ejected. Back when we were playing, we had hecklers all the time. Remember Robert? What was the attorney's name in D.C.? Oh, what was Robert's?
Robin Ficker?
Ficker. Oh, he would sit right behind the bench. He wouldn't say anything racial, but he was classic, and you couldn't get rid of him until something happened. It was one in Cleveland. I think it was one in Detroit. It was unreal. Unbelievable.
Okay, but how personal are they getting with you?
No, one time, Quinn Buckner drawing up a play, and he's in the back. He said, Emmy Jackson, Amal Mashburn, Ace and Kid, I don't know why you playing. None of y'all got any J's. Saying stuff like that. And he will hold up a chalkboard behind. Don't listen to him. He doesn't know what he's talking about. At some point, you look forward to actually seeing and listening to what he's going to say. But, I think Luka, he's at that point of his career, too, where the Mavericks have been in between. They got to Western Conference Finals, okay? Can you get over the top?
Yeah.
And it seems like we don't talk about Dallas, but because of the roster construction, especially in the Western Conference, it makes it more difficult to put him in that conversation because he hasn't won yet. But he's been to the Western Conference Finals.
So that's Jim Jackson on the Luka incident. And, the long-forgotten Robin Ficker. Actually, he didn't convey to the new building. So you got to go back over 25 years. The last time that the then Bullets, as they transitioned to the Wizards, played at the Capitol Center was 1997. So, we're going back 26 years here. And Ficker did not go to D.C., I guess because of the write-offs he could get with the team being in Maryland. He was able to do it, but he was such a pain in the butt to the other teams. And then Charles Barkley liked him. So Charles Barkley paid for him to go with him in the playoffs so he could heckle the other team. Crazy stuff. All right, that's it for me. Be back here tomorrow, and again, we'll have more of these great interviews that have been done by Joe Buck and Dan Patrick. This one with Joe Theismann tomorrow. We'll play that, and maybe we'll have a head coach by then. We'll see. Tony's next. See you tomorrow at 9 a.m.